We go. So glad to be back. Hope you had a lovely summer break. Hope you had a good 2 weeks with Ryan. I always love when we have guest instructors come in, right? Because one, instructors see the world differently, right? The way that Ryan sees JavaScript, the way that Ryan sees networking and APIs is just a different perspective than the way I see it, right? And that's really important to keep in mind when you get out into the workforce. You are going to be working with developers who not only see things differently, but may prefer different programming languages or have different opinions. Or, we had a conversation at OpenHack on Tuesday, and the guy was like, "Well, would you recommend learning JavaScript as your first language?" And there was another guy there, and we just went back and forth about the pros and cons of JavaScript versus Python. Which one should you learn first? All of that kind of stuff. So um, it is important to remember that there are different perspectives, different opinions out there, and hopefully it was refreshing to get taught. Of course, we had Nathan come in as well, but to see a different engineer's perspective and teaching style. So with all of that said, I'm going to open up the floor um, to you guys. How are you feeling about APIs? Do you have any lingering questions? We are going to do a little like review project with the Owen Wilson API. I'll give you guys one final day to debrief with APIs, and then we will get started in React starting tomorrow after the capstone check-in. So capstone check-in tomorrow, then we dive into the very beginnings of React, but we will use today as like one final review day for APIs and getting a little bit more practice with them. So with all of that said, how are you feeling about APIs? How did the 2 weeks with Ryan go? How are you feeling about your capstones? Where are you guys at? Give me a vibe check.
Well, I can't say for everybody else, but I feel about APIs. All right, I suppose I feel like I still need more practice with fetch. And Not only I think there was another one I needed more practice with. I think it's let me check because I was definitely having uh, I guess difficulties with the homework. So
I will say the what we're gonna do in class tonight, if you are stuck on the homework, I've heard from previous cohorts that this is a good light bulb moment to get you unstuck. But if after tonight's class you still feel stuck on the New York Times, please, please, please schedule a one-on-one. Unfortunately, I will be traveling next weekend, so I don't have any weekend availability. But I have plenty of availability the rest of the week. And if there's not a time that works in Calendly, check Ryan's. And if Ryan doesn't have it available, shoot me a Slack message, right? And be like, hey, I'm stuck on the homework. This project is worth 20 points of your grade, right? It is a big midterm project. It is the equivalent of four other assignments combined. So if you are feeling stuck on this, you can always submit as much as you have done, but schedule a one-on-one to get that feedback because it could be that one little thing that is holding you back from completing the entire assignment. So reminder that one-on-ones are available. Terry, did you find what
yeah, yeah. It was then I needed more practice with then and fetch. That's what it is. I had to
yes.
I had to have like my older brother kind of guide me a little bit with like then and stuff. So he was definitely a good help, and also I guess W3 school is another good one too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so
I
we
just
will see using .then in tonight's project, and then I'm also going to show you how to do that exact same thing using async and await, right? Two ways of literally accomplishing the exact same thing. And again, it's one of those polarizing things where some students are like, .then makes absolutely no sense to me, but when you told me await async, I got it. And other people are like, I have no idea why you're saying await there. That seems really complicated, but I get how dot then works. So we will see both of them tonight. And then the good news is that once we get through React, the next step is building your own APIs. So using fetch with either promises or async await is going to be continuing to come back. In almost all of our React projects, we're going to be practicing pulling in data from APIs, and then we will work our way up to building our own. Joe, what's up?
Kind of going off of that.
Mhm.
When I was doing mine, when does that due, by the way?
Yesterday.
Okay, good. I was like, you were saying if you're having trouble on the homework, I'm like, was it not due? Because I
Hmm.
stayed up like until 3 in the morning.
No,
Um,
it definitely
I
was, but we don't have a penalty for late assignment. So I think some people like to slide under the radar. I want to say maybe 3/4 of you have it turned in, but that 1/4 is alarming enough that I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to either get help with it or turn something in.
gotcha. Um, but going off of what you and Terry were just talking about, when I was doing like setting up my fetch, um, I came across three, I think, different maybe notations, like storing it in a variable,
Mhm,
um, direct chaining and promise chaining.
mhm.
Those three versions. Were there like are those different efficiencies? Are they different for like readability? Like one's more read, are they older versus newer kind of thing?
Yes, I for both readability, which is subjective, and for older versus newer, async await is newer, right? And the nice thing is that under the hood, async and await is basically doing dot then for you, right? And so it's almost an abstraction, but in the JavaScript engine, whether that's Node or V8, which is what Chrome runs, or whatever is actually evaluating your JavaScript. I think it's V8, might be SpiderMonkey, can't remember. They are basically doing async await, handling those promises for you. So I personally think async await is easier to read. Again, opinion. And it's all just a way of dealing with promises, whether you're chaining them with .then, or you are asyncing awaiting it, or you're awaiting it and then storing that in a variable and then chaining off of that with another await or a .then. The variable storing of it isn't anything like a third way of doing it, so to speak, because they're both going to use either await or .then. But you won't, maybe 20 years from now this will change, but right now if you went to an employer and you showed them your code that had a fetch call and used .then, an employer may ask you, is there another way you could write this code? But they wouldn't look at your .then code and go, ew, like why are you doing it that way? That's the old way of doing it, right? But 10 years ago, no one would look at your jQuery code and go, ew, you're using jQuery. Why are you doing that? Today, anyone would look at jQuery and go, oh, it's kind of the older way of doing it. There are more efficient ways of doing it because JavaScript has upgraded, right? So that answer, as it holds today, is true. Who knows what becomes of that down the road? Terry.
Yeah, also, I need like a little bit more help with Dom. Well, maybe you could probably like help me a little bit. So what's the difference between text content and inner text?
Ooh. That is a ChatGPT question. So I can tell you the difference between inner content and inner HTML. I don't know that I can tell you the difference between inner content and inner text. So inner HTML will actually let you write HTML in there, right? And so I'm guessing Ryan taught you how to do like dot create element and dot append child. That's a slightly different way of doing it the way that I do it, right? Which is just make it a string, shove it in inner HTML, and the browser is smart enough to recognize what those elements are and create that, right? And that goes back to my comments at the beginning of class of, well, that isn't one way better than the other. One is more the very hands-on way of JavaScript, create this element, keep track of these things, then append it in, compared to my way, which is a little more fast and loose, which is JavaScript, pretend this is all a string until you put it in inner HTML, and then suddenly it's not. Suddenly it is the actual HTML elements, right? So inner text or inner content, I believe, is set up so that you can't accidentally create an HTML element, right? It will only take whatever you have created and put it in there without parsing any of the HTML. That's inner text compared to inner HTML, which will parse it out, which will create those elements for you. It is possible, I'm not saying this is the answer, but it is possible that they do the exact same thing. Okay, well, that sounds dumb. Why would we have two things if they do the exact same thing? Well, it turns out that it's up to browsers to be able to support all of these features of the document object model. So it's possible in the ye olden days of the World Wide Web, AOL supported inner content and Netscape supported inner text. And now, all these years later, they were like, "All right, we gotta get on the same page about this." They're doing the exact same things, and so what they do is they alias or map it, and they say inner content and inner text do the exact same thing, but you can use either one of them, and we know what you're trying to do. We'll just take it the older one and map it to the newer one. With all of that said, it is now going to bother me. So I am going to ask.
I just asked if you want
Oh,
me to go over
thank
it.
you.
I posted the like summary for the key differences, but I can go over the whole thing because it did like a couple points for each text
So
content property.
what's the difference between text content and inner text?
Oh, inner text. Was it inner text or inner HTML?
Well, there are three. There's text content, there's inner text, and there's inner HTML. Your answer is what I knew was true, which was inner HTML will parse out the elements, text content will not. But what's the difference between text content and inner text?
Gets or sets the visible text contained within a node, considering the styling that may hide or alter the visibility of the text elements. Unlike text content, I just lost my place. If it just bumped me down. 1 second.
We might be getting in the weeds a little bit. The answer is I mean, ChatGPT, I think, will give you the correct answer on that. And I think the answer is it doesn't matter too much other than the fact if you're putting HTML in that you want to show up as HTML elements, use inner HTML. Otherwise, I think text content and inner text would do very similar things, but there may be slight differences between the two.
Yeah, inner text and text content do not parse HTML tags. They treat them as plain text.
And that
And
also, oh, I'm
what's
sorry.
I was just going to say what's kind of interesting is as we get into React, we'll be using the document object model a little less because React really unifies the data that you're trying to represent with your HTML directly. So the good news is over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think 3 weeks, we'll be seeing React. The reason why we teach the DOM is it's a very important thing to know, right? When we're working with JavaScript, whenever we want to show the output of that JavaScript in a web page, we need the document object model. So it's very hard to say, oh, I'm a JavaScript developer without being able to at least explain the basics of why you use document object model and how it's the bridge between HTML and JavaScript, right? In React, there is something built into it called the virtual DOM. And the virtual DOM is basically the engine under the hood that controls how your data shows up and how we react to new data coming in. So that is coming up in the next couple days. Any other questions?
So we will use inner text and text content as like for security reasons, right? But we don't want to use like inner HTML just in case somebody like I guess manipulate the HTML and put like a malicious code in there or something.
I will purposely make a point of how we would want to use inner HTML in tonight's code, and why inner text wouldn't work. So I will show that tonight. This I will say at this level of until you are building a backend and have things storing in the database and executing code, the security benefits of inner text versus inner HTML are pretty overblown at this moment. It's not like if you use inner HTML, you're going to protect your website from like stealing someone's credit card number, right? Like we're not at that level of security. But once you get servers involved in databases, that's when it becomes a little bit more important. But React has those protections built in at the framework level, and we won't be using inner HTML or inner text once we get into React. Okay. Any final questions? Any questions about the capstone check-in before we dive into the WoW API?
Okay, so a reminder, we don't need to add JavaScript into this cap. Okay.
No JavaScript required for tomorrow's capstone check-in. It will be required for the capstone check-in after this one. And the goal of tomorrow's check-in again is if I looked at your HTML and your HTML alone, no mockups, no other outside resources, if I'm just looking at your capstone HTML so far in the browser, would I understand what your project is for and understand how to interact with it? If I do, then that's all that's required. So we're shooting for at least half of your HTML pages created. Some people's capstone will only be 1 or 2 pages. Some people's capstones will be 15 pages, right? So this capstone check-in can vary a little bit, but again, the goal for tomorrow is if I knew nothing about your capstone, could I look at your pages and get a good idea of what your capstone project is? And that's the goal for tomorrow. All right. Last call for questions. All right, let's dive into the Owen Wilson WoW API. I'm going to paste a link in the chat. You guys are welcome to pull that up. And I'm also going to fire up my week. I know what week it is. My week 12, week 13. Google Sheets taking forever to load.
I think it's 13.
Oh, I wonder if Google Docs is down. No. Wonder if Google Sheets is down. That's interesting. We're going to run with week 13. I think that's right. I'm going to make my day 1 folder. I'm going to pop open my day 1. It is week 13, finally loaded. I'm going to create my index.html and my script.js. I will share the live stream. In my index.html, I will do my exclamation point enter and throw in my script src to my script.js and go live and throw my script.js in the bottom half. Okay, so what's going on with this Owen Wilson API? So a lot of free APIs out there, and if everything goes well according to schedule tonight, you'll actually have a couple minutes at the end of class to pick your own random API and try and get it to work. But the basic idea here is that we're distilling everything that Ryan covered from the very low-level networking and routers and packets and how all of that works all the way up to where we are as JavaScript developers, which is you've got data, I want that data to show up on my page, right? And as we get more exposure to APIs, we're going to also be building our own, learn how to integrate databases into that. Ryan will come back in and do a class on authentication. And he will also, I believe we have it scheduled for TypeScript as well. So you have not seen the last of Ryan yet. And then, of course, Nathan comes back in towards the end of the program and teaches you guys about full stack deploys. With all of that said, what's going on with an API? The API is, again, someone else has data on their server, and we want to be able to not only get access to that data, but to make that data show up on our own page. So, oftentimes READMEs or any kind of API documentation will have a really long explanation, right? What are the 3 pieces of information that they're going to tell you? 4 pieces of information. They're going to tell you the URL, right? Hey, this is what you need to, this is where you need to go to get the information. They're going to give you the method to get that information, whether that's a get or a post. It's just something that they have set up, and they say, hey, if you use this URL and this method, then I know what you want me to do on my side. You will have an example of information getting sent in. That information could get sent in via a get parameter, or also called a URL parameter. It could be part of the path that you are sending in, the URL itself, or it could be in the body of the method, right? Can't do that on GET requests, but anything else you can send in the body. Technically, there are more ways too. You could send it in the headers and all kinds of stuff there, but those are the 3 main, right? Either part of the URL, part of the GET parameters, which are part of the URL, or part of the body itself. And then finally, they're going to tell you, if you send this data in, you're going to get this data out. And they really are saying this is the format that the data is going to come back in. That's really important because we want to be able to pick apart pieces of that data. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to start with the very first section, right? It says random wow, retrieve a random wow in JSON format. So if I go to this URL, they're telling me here is the data that's going to come back. It's going to be the movie that Owen Wilson said wow in. It's going to give me the duration of the whole movie. It's going to give me the even down to the timestamp, hours, minutes, seconds of how far into the movie he said wow. The kind of cool part here, though, is that they're also going to give me the poster for that movie, and they're going to give me links to that video of him saying wow, that couple-second clip. Why would you ever need to do this? This is just an example, right? I don't really love Owen Wilson that much, but someone clearly did enough to build an API and a database of all the times he's saying wow. There are much more helpful APIs out there. We will be revisiting the weather project, where we will be pulling in that weather data, getting it to show up. We will be revisiting a chat application as we build out our own APIs. Lots of better examples of this. But this is the clearest way that we can review .then and await async, and we can also touch the document object model a little bit. So number one thing that I'm going to do is in documentation, I'm looking for authentication. There's nothing in this API that says I need an API key, I need a username and password. Sometimes authentication can be a really complicated flow. They may use something called OAuth, literally the letter O and then AUTH. API keys are kind of the easiest form of authentication, but what we're hoping for is this API doesn't require any authentication. And in fact, it doesn't. If it did, it would be part of the documentation. But because this is a GET request, I'm going to start by just opening that link. And that link shows me the JSON coming right back. It may look like this. That's okay. I have a Chrome extension installed that formats my JSON for me. But if we refresh this page, we can see we get another example, just another random movie of Owen Wilson saying, wow. So we've got this data, and I'm like, all right, now what is my objective, right? I made the API call. I tested it in my browser. It's working fine in my browser. What's the next step? Well, I want to get this data showing up in my code. in my JavaScript console. We don't want to shoot for the moon here. We don't want to say, I need to get this into the page. We don't want to say we need some pretty HTML formatting. All we're looking at here, we're not even looking at the data yet. All we're saying is, can I get this information to show up in my code in my console? So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to copy this API URL. I'm going to head over to my script.js, and we're going to access the data two different ways. We will start with the .then. So I'm going to say in my script.js, fetch, and what URL do I want to fetch? I want to fetch my random URL. Now, you could use single quotes or double quotes here. Oftentimes, you will be using template literals in your URL, right? Injecting some piece of data. So in general, I like using template literals for URLs, but in this case, because we're not using that $ curly brace syntax, we don't need the backticks, but doesn't hurt to have them there just in case we need them down the road. What happens when this fetch happens? All I'm going to do is throw a console log around that. You don't have to, because we're going to delete it in a second. If we look in our console, we see a promise. What is a promise? A promise just means I promise that there will be data there eventually. So this promise is initially pending. We said, hey, go get this data. And it's like, I promise I will get that data, and it is now pending. Well, we can't do anything with the promise itself. We're trying to get access to the data. So I'm going to take out my console.log, and I'm going to say, hey, go do that fetch. And it goes, I promise, here's that data, or I promise you will have the data. It is now pending. I'm like, okay. Then once that promise is fulfilled, I would like to do something with that. The data that is going to come back from that then is not just my JSON. I'm not going to get access to it directly. What it's going to do is it's going to return the response. And this response has all kinds of information in it. It has the status code. It's got the headers. It's got the data that we're looking for. It's got all kinds of information in it. So we are going to say, then you are going to get a response. And just to test this, we are going to console log the res. Res is short for response. Could spell out response there. You could say data resolved. You could call it a bunch of different things, but naming convention says res or response is the way to do it. Okay, so we get our then in there. We come over here, and now we get to see our response. And I'm like, all right, this is good. This is a step in the right direction. The problem is that we've got okay, true, we've got status 200, we got the URL that it's coming back. And if we look at our body, the body is a readable stream. Like, the fuck is that? You know, like, I just want my data. Just show me what you showed me in the browser. Well, in order to make that data readable, we need to convert it. And we can either convert it, that readable stream, that we can read that stream into text, but we can also use a shortcut. We know that the data coming back is JSON. It even says it is JSON in the example response. It also just looks like JSON, right? And so because of that, we can parse that out. So what we're going to do is we are going to return the res.json. .json is a method built into fetch that is going to parse that data out for us, not only into text, but from text into the actual information that we're looking to use. But if we just console log this out, again, you don't need that console log yet. We look at our console log and it's another freaking promise. And we're like, okay, this just means it's running asynchronously. It is running in the background, right? So we can't access that data directly. We need another .then. And this is what is called promise chaining. Joe, to your point, and I will answer your question in the chat in a second. This is saying, hey, I'm going to return something from one promise resolution and then chain that to the next one. So what I can say is, okay, once you parse the JSON, JavaScript's like, I promise I will go parse it. And I'm like, not enough. I want you to tell me when you are done parsing it. I don't want to know that you are promising to I don't want to know that the promise is pending. I want to know when the promise is fulfilled. I want to know when you've got that data. So I'm going to chain that with another then. And that is going to give me access to my data. Well, what do I want to do when I get that data out? I want to console log out the data. So I save that, I come over here, and now when I pop that open, I finally see all of the data that I'm expecting to come back. Joe, you asked what's the difference between JSON parse res? Res does not have all of the data in it that we are, well, res has a lot more data in it than just the body, just the response itself, right? It had the status code in it. It had the okay, true. It had the URL itself. Res has more information in it than just the body. So if we ask JSON.parse to parse res, res is already an object. It's got a lot of data in it. I don't know why you want me to parse it. Res is already an object. So what the .json method does is it goes take the res itself, go to just the body, parse the readable stream into text, and then the text into an object using JavaScript object notation. So .json is basically a shortcut to convert the body's readable stream all the way through to an object that we can deal with. It just happens to do that asynchronously, which is why we need to chain it with the .then. Okay, pausing there. Did anyone not get this to work? Does anyone have questions? Does anything conflict with what Ryan has taught you how to do this so far? Does anyone need one more minute? Okay.
Wait,
Yep.
what's it supposed to look like again?
In the console, it will look like an array with an object in it. Oh, that's nice. I just lost power for a second. I know there are thunderstorms rolling in, so if you guys or I suddenly disappear, hopefully that doesn't hit us. Anyway, if you click the little arrow to the left of it, it will pop open. You may have to hit the arrow on the 0 as well, but then it will show you all of the data that fetch is pulling back.
Yeah. Never mind. I got it.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone need help?
No question, but I keep putting an A in JSON. Isn't that so foolish? I'm like, what is my error? And it's that.
So our sales guy has never been particularly technical at the startup I work at, not Hack Upstate. And whenever he's talking about it, we're like, oh, it's just an API, right? So our entire service is just data that comes out of the API. And he goes, yeah, it just uses JSON. And we're like, every time we hear him say it, it's like, no, it does not use JSON. It uses JSON. There is a difference. Okay, so let's look at another way to do this. This can get really messy, right? Because we are chaining multiple .thens. And the problem with this approach is we only have access to the data inside of that promise, right? So that means inside of that .then is the only place we can access that data. If I come out here and just do a console.log data, it's going to tell me the fuck is data. Data is not defined, right? Because again, I only have access to the data in here. Well, if I need to make several API calls based off of the data that's coming out of my first API call, all of a sudden I'm going to be super indented because I have to keep on chaining those .thens, and I only have access to the data inside of the .then. So here's how we solve that. We use async await. Now, in order to use the await keyword in current versions of JavaScript, we need to tell it that the entire function is going to include await code somewhere. So what we do is we say const make API call, and we just made that function name up. We could really call it anything. And we make it equal to a normal function. The only difference that we do is that we say, hey, this is going to be async. There are some newer versions of Node and browsers that are now supporting await at the root level, right? So they're saying you don't need to flag things as async anymore, but not knowing how far back your browser support goes, it's a good idea to throw async here. Now, all I'm going to do is console.log make API call just to test it. I come over here, and this is coming out from my line 6. That's coming out from my console log. So where is my make API call? It's not here. That's because we just made it a function. And just like any function, this function does not run until something calls it. It could be an on click, it could be some kind of event that's doing it, but we want this to run right when the page loads. So all we're going to do is say make API call with the parentheses here. That is then going to make our make API call show up in the browser. Okay, now, again, we're going to accomplish this exact same thing using a different syntax. Instead of .then, which again is dealing with promises, we are still going to be dealing with those promises, but we're going to use it with the async and the await syntax instead. We already put the async keyword on our function. Because of that, we are now allowed to use await anywhere we want, as long as it is inside the function itself. Michael.
All right, so I got to interrupt a little bit, but I'm not getting any of this stuff in my console yet.
Check your index.html. Do you have your script tag in place?
I believe I do.
Okay, share your
I
screen.
do.
Okay. Let me see your script.js. Interesting. Try and refresh in your browser. Peculiar. Let me have remote. One. Script.js. Very weird. Okay, let's try turning it off and back on again.
Oh, there we go.
Ah.
Yep.
Just hanging off the screen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Of course. Anyone else need help? Okay. So now we've got our async all set up. We are free and clear of using our awaits now. So what I'm going to do, I can take my console log out, and I'm going to say const res. Where did we see res before? We saw res right here. This res and this res will be accomplishing the same thing. if I take my fetch and throw it down here, I can console log out my res, come over here, and see I've got my promise pending. Like, these freaking promises are preventing me from getting access to my data. They're pesky, they're in my way. Instead of telling it, hey, go do this promise, then tell me when it's done. Go do this next promise and tell me then when it's done. I just want you to wait. Wait for the promise to be done. Wait for the promise to be fulfilled, and then give me that data once you have waited for it, once it is ready. That is how we are going to use our await. We're going to say, yes, we know the fetch is going to run in the background. We know that the fetch is asynchronous. We don't want it to be asynchronous. We're in no hurry. Just wait for the data to come in. And when the data does finally come in, wait and store it, the final data, not the promise itself, in the res. Now, when we take a look at our res, we get this response. I'm like, okay, this response looks a lot like this response when we were console logging it up here. So we can do that again. We can say, hey, our const data is going to await the res parsing out the JSON. And now we're going to console log out our data and see the exact same thing, a random movie, so it's not the exact same data, but we see we get access to that data. So 2 different ways of dealing with promises. Both are achieving the exact same thing, just slightly different syntax.
Which would you say is easier to use? .NET API?
I use async and await religiously. I almost never use .then, and the main reason for that is because oftentimes when you're working with APIs or anything asynchronous, you're getting the result of it, and then you need to use that result to go do another thing. And if you keep on using that data to do another thing and another thing and another thing, all of a sudden you realize that you are about 9 .then levels deep. And at that point, you've reached the point of no return, right? And so I like this await because we're not indenting every time that we need to use that data for something else. So I only use async await. In fact, when we were looking at solutions for our database, I almost didn't pick a solution because it was all promise-based. We are seeing more and more code go over to promises because promises mean that we get more control over running things asynchronously in the background. So promises can be really powerful. They can also be really annoying when you're like, what do you mean I can't get access to the data? And all you need to do is throw an await in front of it, make the function itself async, and then you can use your awaits to deal with all of your promises without having to worry about .thens. So personally, I'm a bigger fan of this, but if you're looking at this and you're like, I don't get why we need to use await, but I totally get using the .then because we're getting a promise and we're saying when the promise is fulfilled, then do this next thing, that is also totally fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anyone not have their code working or does not see the similarities between the two or need an explanation? Hopefully this is all just review. We are going to play around with the document object model here a little bit before we move on.
I'm not sure if I did it. 'Cause I'm not sure to like
In
what
your
my
console,
is really telling me.
you
I'll share my screen.
yeah, go for it. Maybe wrong screen, or are you dragging them over?
Oh, sorry. I did do the wrong screen.
That's it. Yeah, so what it's doing is it's returning one movie for each call. So
Okay.
it is doing the right thing.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Now that we've got this working, we've got the data in, now we got to do something with the data. that's when the document object model comes in, right? We want to take this data and display it to the user. So I'm going to do it with inner HTML, which is not Ryan's method, but it will show you how we access that data. Before we can do that, though, we need to extract the data out. So I am looking at I'm going to comment this one out because we only need one of them, right? These are two doing the exact same things. So I'm going to comment the fetch out. I'm going to use my async and await method instead. So I'm going to come over here and I'm looking at this data and I'm like, all right, I just want the movie title accessed in a JavaScript variable. So I'm looking at this and it says, hey, I can get access to the movie title right here. So that is supposed to be in my data. That means I should be able to say const movie title equals data dot movie. I come in here, I log out my movie title, and my JavaScript code tells me it is undefined. Pesky little, okay, why is that? I'm going to go back, I'm going to put my console log back in and look at my entire data. And again, the movie is hanging out right there. It's Cars 3. Why can I not get access to Cars 3 in my movie title? Does not need to be stringified. The .json is parsing out the string into an object that we can access. Well, you're on the right track.
Do you have to like refer to like the string that is inside? Like if it was
It's
like
not
a
inside of a
nest?
string, but it is nested in something. What is it nested in?
Is it the API URL?
Look at the way our data is coming out. We see the curly braces. We know a curly brace means an object. What do the square braces mean?
An
Right?
array?
An array. Okay. Now, if we look at our API call, again, we can see that a little bit clearer. Yes, all of this data is in an object, but then they put the whole object in an array. Why would they do that? Well, this API a couple years from now may go, we want to return 5 random wows that Owen Wilson said, and we're just going to play them back to back to back, right? I don't know, down the road. Well, if they did that, it may break people's websites who were only expecting one movie to come back. So they kind of future-proof this. And Tiffany, you totally got it. We need to say, even though there's only one movie coming back, because that movie is in an array, we need to bust through that array to get to the object itself. So in our movie title, we are going to say bracket 0. And this is where we don't get to control the API. We don't get to say, just give me the object. We don't get to change that data format. When we are making our own APIs down the road, we will be able to get in there and change how that data is getting sent. But because this is a third-party API, because we do not have access to it, we do need to bust into the index 0. Now, if we take a look, we get Bottle Rocket. And if I refresh it again, I get Haunting. Okay, there are 2 other pieces of information that I would like to extract from this. 3 pieces of information. I would like to get out now we'll just do 2. The poster, which is going to be in my data, still 0 dot poster. And I want to get out the video. But if we look at that video in our console, we can see that there is another object. that object is giving it to us in all of these different resolutions. So we need to go one level deeper on the onion, peel back in to get to that video URL. So I am going to say const video URL is equal to data, still bracket 0 because it's all in the index 0 of the array. Now I want to go into the video here. And you would think I could say .1080p and call it a day. But VS Code is cranky with me. Why is VS Code cranky with me? Because JavaScript, being the quirky, weird programming language it is, does not let you use dot notation if the key you are accessing starts with a number. I'm like, come on, it's 1080p. It's right there. You can see it. Well, JavaScript's like, no dot notation if your key of the object starts with a number. Instead, you need to explicitly tell me it is a string you are trying to access in bracket notation. So even though we can use dot notation for these keys, because again, they all start with a letter, because this key starts with a number, we need to switch back over to bracket notation instead. Now, we don't see any of this data in our console yet. We're not logging it out. If you wanted to test at this point, you could throw a comment in here, add in your poster video URL, make sure you're accessing all of the data correctly. But we're going to skip to that next step of actually making this data work. I saw a hand raised and then a hand lowered. Does anyone have a question?
I have one, but you already talked about it.
Okay, so let's test all of this out. In order to make this show up on the page, and again, we're not going for very pretty UI here, we're just practicing with our APIs. I'm going to put a hole in my body. I'm going to make a div that I can reach in, access that div, and use it. So I'm going to create a div ID that says movie info. Then I'm going to come down into my make API call method, and I'm going to say const movie info is equal to document get element by ID movie info. Then I'm going to come down in my movie info. And this, Terry, is where we're going to touch on inner text versus inner HTML. So using my method, not necessarily Ryan's method of append child and all of that stuff, but if we use my method and said inner text or text content, I can come in with a template literal here, right? And let's say, all right, I want an H1 to show up because it's the big movie title. And I'm going to throw in the movie title and close out that H1. Well, now if I save that, I get a problem because I misspelled movie right here. Make sure your document element, get element by ID has movie spelled correctly. I did have a typo there. Now when I come over here, it's like arrow H1 and then the name of the movie and close the H1. I'm like, no, I wanted that to be an H1. Make it big. Well, it is saying, no, you set the inner text. So I'm going to ignore any HTML elements that are in there and just make it show up as text. So if that is your intention, if you're like, all right, all I'm throwing in here is text, there should never be H1, inner text is completely fine to use, especially if you're only setting like one piece of one div or one element, that's completely fine. But I'm kind of hacking this, right? I'm not going in my JavaScript and creating 3 separate elements. I'm like, listen, you know it's HTML, I know it's HTML. JavaScript, just do your job, make the elements for me. So I am going to change my inner text to my inner HTML, and just like that, I get an H1 showing up with my movie title. Now I'm going to finish this out. I'm going to put in an IMG SRC going to my poster. And I will put a style tag on that of height 100 pixels. Now I get my little movie poster. And then I will finish it off with a video tag. I always have to look these up. Video HTML5, because they do some weird nesting thing. So I say video and I close my video tag. And I have to say source src equals, drop in my video URL and set the type equal to video MP4. You're like, where in God's name did he get all of that? You can see right here, I had to go to W3 Schools and pull that out. Sure, you could have gone to ChatGPT and say, how do I make a video show up in my page? But this is just some documentation. If I come over here, I am going to put one more thing on here. I will set my height to, I don't know, 50%. Hope. I will set my height to, I don't know, 500 pixels. Nope, I'm going to use exactly what they give me. And now I get my video. We can throw controls on it. And finally, I can play him saying wow in iSpy. And if I refresh, we get another wow. So I know I went a little fast here. Let me clean this code up just a tiny little bit so you can see it. Just an example of using 3 pieces of API information. We extracted the data here. We used the movie title in an H1. We used the URL of the poster here. And then finally, we used the source SRC video URL right here. So, Joe, your code would work if you took the inner HTML out of the first line and moved it to the inner movie HTML. So what you're basically doing is you're not storing the reference to inner HTML. You're actually getting the content of the inner HTML and storing that string in movie HTML. So in order to make it's not a reference to inner HTML in the document object model. It's getting the value of inner HTML and storing that instead. So you can store the entire element, which is the reference to the element, in a variable called movie HTML, and then do movie HTML.inner HTML, and then it would work. I don't know why the intricacies of not storing the reference work as they do, but basically once you access inner HTML, it has stringified it and lost all reference to the DOM item itself.
Gotcha. I was sitting there, I'm like, this logically makes sense. I'm not sure why, but that makes sense.
Okay, we are going to pause there. Does anyone have questions about this? I know I went a little fast here on the elements, but if you kind of read through them, they're all kind of similar, right? We're using each one an image and a video tag. The only difference here is the data that we're referencing inside of them. And of course, all of this data that we are creating, we can actually go over to the Elements tab, pop open our body, and see all of the HTML it was generating, including that video tag. And if you hit the refresh button, you will see it will go back in, pull in another movie. Anyone not have their movie title, their movie poster, or a video player showing?
I am missing 2 and 3.
Okay. Go ahead and share your screen. Usually it's something a little picky about the syntax, but take a look. You did not start your screen share yet.
Thank you.
Of course. You're sharing your Slack screen. I
Okay.
don't know if that was intentional.
No, it was not.
There we go. I believe one problem. Give me remote. It's always just pops up on the monitor that you're not looking at. It's so annoying. One of them is probably a single versus double quote.
Oh. Yeah.
That's one.
Okay.
Then this one is missing a closing double quote.
Yeah. All right.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Any other questions?
I don't know. Mike, leaked the back channel. We gotta delete our messages. No, I'm just playing. I feel like I'm still stuck with like Dom. I don't know. Like I mean, everything is working on my end. It's just I don't know. It's like I'm not understanding what that I guess the inner HTML, especially with the temporal literals.
Yeah, so let's look at that a little bit. So if I take all of this, right? And I say console log all of that out. Don't follow me here. This is just, playing around. I see all of this stuff show up. And I'm like, well, where is this images coming from? Where is this videos coming from? Right? I didn't type that out. That's just appearing. Well, if we look here, the $ curly brace is the same as string concatenation. It's saying take whatever value was in poster and dump it in right here. Where did poster come from? Poster came from our data. Where did the data come from? That was coming from our API that we parsed out all of that, right? So all this template literal is doing is basically, it is a fancier way of doing string concatenation. So we come over here and we're concatenating all of that information in. None of that is the document object model. That is all just a fancy way to make a string. Questions on that so far? Okay. Now that we've got that string, hey, it sure looks like this string is HTML. But JavaScript's like, don't care. You told me it was a string. I'm going to deal with it like it's a string. You happen to use backticks, a template literal. You put some fancy variables in there. I figured out what those variables are. At the end of the day, it's all just a string. And we can even prove that because if we say type of here and save it out, it tells us all of that data is just a string. JavaScript plays naive. It's just a bunch of letters you put together. Now, what is different is we went in and we said, hey, document get element by ID movie info. Now, document, HTML document, from our JavaScript reach into our HTML and go pull out an object that is modeling this entire div. So what do we get here? If we console log out our movie info, it actually shows us the div. All right. Why do we call that? I'm curious. I actually don't know what will happen here. If I get the type of the movie info, it tells me it's an object. Like, well, that's kind of interesting. Why is it an object? Well, because there are a bunch of different keys associated with this object. One of the keys is inner HTML. Well, what are some other keys that we know that we can interact with the object that is modeling the document? Well, we could do .style, we could do .video, we could do, right, all of these different properties. We saw .get attribute. All of these different things are coming from the model inside of the object that is representing the document of our HTML. So all we're doing here is saying, hey, we get access to all different kinds of things on movie info. I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try it. This could all blow up spectacularly in my face. Yeah, no, it does not want to do that. So what are all the different things that we can access in the HTML DOM? We can go to W3 Schools, and it will literally list everything out that we can do. But if we look at the menu, we can see... I thought they had it listed here. All of these different things that we can do with the DOM, right? And if we look at DOM CSS, it will tell us, hey, document get element by ID. We already did that, but we can get an element called P2 and apply some style to it, some CSS with a color of blue. Well, we can also come over here and say, hey, go get the inner HTML. What is the inner HTML? That is literally the HTML that shows up between the opening div tag and the closing div tag. What do we want to do? We want to take this fancy template literal, which JavaScript turned into a string, and we take that string and we shove it into the inner HTML of our div tag. And now all of a sudden, the div tag wakes up and goes, oh, that's not a string. That's some HTML in there. I know what an H1 is. I know what an image tag is. Oh, image tag has an SRC. I got to go load that image in. Oh, there's a video tag here. I know how to show videos. Let me go get that movie URL and make it show up here. So up until this point, it's all JavaScript. Then we reach into the document object model, and now the bridge has been completed. Now our JavaScript has reached in and is talking to our HTML. But this is the moment that we meet in the middle. JavaScript goes on the bridge. It goes, here's this string. HTML, do whatever you want with it. And HTML gets it and goes, dumbass JavaScript, that's not a string. That's HTML. I need to go make all those elements show up. And that's exactly what it does. Oh, I just closed it. Here. Does that help?
Yeah, that helped a lot. Yeah. Do you still have that the link to the project that we did with like that, like the list of project, like the Magic 8 Ball and the quiz and stuff? Because I feel like I might need to still like.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I put that in Canvas. Of course, I was logged out. I'm pretty sure that was in maybe a week 9 assignment. Sorry, I intentionally don't have one password on this account.
I found it. It was week 10. It's week 10. I got it.
Week 10 in class projects. Yeah. Okay. we've got one more thing that we are going to do before we go on break. And then when we come back from break, you guys are going to pick an API, any API, and get that information showing up on the page. And that will be our last kind of API project that is not in React. So tomorrow, again, we will start with capstone presentations. Quick is the name of the game tomorrow, right? Like we want to shoot for everyone only taking 2 or 3 minutes, showing where you have progress, letting us know if you are stuck anywhere or need help with anything, and we'll move on to the next one. So the first capstone presentations, the first capstone check-ins always take a lot of time. This is now our second one, right? So the goal is to get this moving a little bit quicker. So shoot for short tomorrow, then we will dive into React. What we are going to do right now, before we go on break and before you guys, oh wow, it is pouring. Before you guys have a chance to work with your own APIs and test reading documentation, getting that information to show up, interacting with it, I would like, instead of hitting the refresh button and making the another movie appear, I would like to put a change movie or get another wow button on my page that does that. How would I go about doing that?
You could for like make a button, and then when you click the
Mhm.
button, it'll like refresh it.
So I'll say, all right, so I put my button in.
And can you call the API like within the button using the DOM in JavaScript?
How would I do that?
Set a ID,
Okay.
call it.
And then what?
I think you'll have to. Uh,
You can use get element by ID in the JavaScript. And then throw the ID in there.
wait, but don't we need to put a cons on the document?
Yeah, save it in a variable.
And then what?
Then you do inner HTML, but like I don't know how to reference it. Take the another button variable and do dot notation inner HTML and then the video.
What do we want to happen when that button is, I'm trying to avoid the word and really
A
struggling.
function.
Oh wait, don't we need like an on click?
Oh yeah, that's
like an
true. I
add,
forgot
yeah,
about that.
event listener.
All right, what happens on click?
Get a new wow.
Uh-huh. And what did we say does all of the new wow?
Make API call.
Uh-huh. And just like that, it's working. Now, there is a shortcut that you could have done there. Because make API call is already a function up here, we could actually save doing all of this work, and on our button, we wouldn't even need the ID. We could do the on click right here. We could say, and because make API call is already defined, this should also work the same way. So that's a shortcut, right? Your on click you can attach into an existing function. But that is just a different way of doing it. Or you can reach in through the document object model, use the on click property and attach the function of make API call to it. And that also does the exact same thing. All right. Any other questions? Anything that you would like to add to this page before we go on break?
Wait, don't we need like the year of the movie too?
Hmm?
I said, don't we need like the year of the movie, like when the movie?
Yeah, so if you look at the data coming back, there is all kinds of other information in here, right? The full line of what he said wow on. You could get the audio only clip. But oftentimes when we're working with an API, we don't actually want all of the data to show up, right? Oftentimes all we really care about is pieces of that information. A good example of that is we're going to use the weather API, and the weather API is going to like return sunset information. And I'm like, well, just because I have access to that data doesn't necessarily mean that I want to display it on the page, right? So it is totally fine to get access to more information than you need in the API, and then only choose the pieces of information that you want. Of course, you could go through and style this. You could use Bootstrap with it. You could put in line breaks. You could put a nice border around things. You could do all of that. But the point of this is just to get practice with the API and our final example with using the document object model. Any other questions? There is a way to modify this a little bit. You can actually specify a specific movie and get the wow back from that. You could build this out into an entire web application, right? So you could say, hey, I'm going to, on my homepage, show a list of all of the movies he said wow in, and make it so when you click on one of those movies, it shows you just the wow from that movie. You could filter it down by year. You can even get a list of all of the movies that he says wow in and build up the application from there. So after break, you guys will have an opportunity to either use other API calls on this existing project to make it more interactive, or I will provide a list of suggested APIs that you can play around with. And the goal is just to make an API call, get it to show up on the page. And if you are able to get that working, make it a little interactive. Maybe the user has a search box and we let them type in a specific movie, hit the search button, and have a wow from that movie show up. Lots of different ways of approaching this, but we want to make sure that you got practice with APIs before we move into React tomorrow. Because in React, we're still going to be using fetch, but instead of using the document object model, we're going to learn about a concept called state. And state makes it a little bit easier to interact with the page without having to modify the document object model directly. So we will go on break. We will do attendance when we get back. Be back at 7:15. I think that's enough time. Be back at 7:15. I will have a list of APIs for you, and we will go from there. Oh, and Austin, I just saw your answer in the chat. Sorry, I was not ignoring you. Chat was just not popped up.